Hello, and welcome to the Odyssey Lesson 22, Analyzing Complex Characters and How Their Interactions Advance the Plot and Develop the Theme. In the previous lesson, you analyzed phrases for how they convey specific meaning and add variety and interest to a text. You were expected to complete Activity 2 on the Book 10 Syntax handout. Today, we will read excerpts of Book 11, and you will analyze how complex characters develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, and advance the plot or develop the theme. You will need your copy of the Odyssey, the Book 11 handout, mythweb.com, and pantheon.org. The Book 11 handout is found in the post for this lesson, as well as the links for mythweb.com and pantheon.org. I want you to read along with me from the top of the Book 11 handouts. Book 11 of the Odyssey marks a pivotal time for Odysseus as he has to travel to the underworld to learn how to manage the remainder of his journey home. In this section of the epic, Odysseus fills the archetype of crossing the threshold, moving from the physical world in which he is familiar and comfortable into an unknown world of mystery and vulnerability. Many of the conversations that he has in this realm change him as a character. As you read excerpts of Book 11, use the guide below to help you keep track of the lessons that he learns. Today's lesson is going to be different in that you're going to be reading the sections and answering the questions on this handout rather than answering them on Nearpod. We will now read the first excerpt of Book 11. Pay careful attention to the characters and conflicts that are occurring. You're going to start reading on page 249 at line 1 and read through line 88 at the top of page 252. Then you're going to take notes on your Book 11 handout. You will have about 13 minutes to complete this section. Now you will begin reading the second excerpt. You will start on page 252 where passage 1 ended and read through line 256 at the bottom of page 256. At the end of the selected passage, you're going to take notes on your Book 11 handouts. You're going to need to pay careful attention to the characters and the conflicts that they are facing. You will have about 12 minutes to complete this section. Now, before we go on to the third section, I want to kind of explain to you some things that a scholar who studies the Odyssey has said. A man named Scott Hewler, in his book No Man's Lands, describes the encounter between Odysseus and his mother as follows. Odysseus also converses with his own mother, Anticlea, who is stunned to learn has died of longing during her son's long absence. She tells him that Penelope remains faithful and that Telemachus is safe. This all happens, of course, around 7 years before his return, so the ruinous suitors have not yet beset Odysseus's home. On the other hand, she tells him Odysseus's father has withdrawn from the palace and lives like a slave out in the country. Shaken by the news of her death, Odysseus tries to embrace her 3 times, extending his arms with futility. Odysseus has gone to the underworld to meet a prophet, and while he's there, he bumps into his mother, who died, no less, from grief because of his absence. For a guy who spent the last year idling with an enchantress, this has to be a shaky moment. While I've been living the good life, my mother died. 90+% of his crew has been killed on the way home, but Odysseus still has no trouble enjoying Circe's hospitality. Then, suddenly, it's not some nameless crew member, it's his mom, dead because of him. Hewler also asserts that this book is the center, the tipping point of the Odyssey. It contains the moment where Odysseus finally turns toward home, like he means it. Now we will begin reading our last excerpts. I'm going to note these on the board so you can kind of keep up with what they are. In the middle of Book 11, there is a break in the narrative. Remember that Odysseus is telling his story at the feast. The hosting king Alcinous wants to know if Odysseus saw anyone else in the land of the dead. Each person whom Odysseus describes in his answer to King Alcinous offered him some sort of advice or warning when he was in the underworld. So you're going to read lines 436 to 504 on pages 262 to 263. Then you're going to read lines 541 to 573 on pages 265 to 266. Finally, you will read lines 613 through 649 on pages 267 to 269. As you read this, pay careful attention to the characters and conflicts that are occurring. To complete the next task, you will need to look up the character's background in a handbook of mythological terms, the glossary at the back of your text, or the internet, in other words, pantheon.org or mythweb.com, to understand the passages fully. You're going to complete the character background column of the graphic organizer on page 2 of your Book 11 handouts. You will have 13 minutes to complete these parts. If you need some more hints on how to complete the second column of the graphic organizer, keep this in mind. For each character background, you are going to explain who the character was, what the character was famous for, and how the character died. As I said, you'll have 13 minutes to complete this part. Before we move on, I want to point out something else that Scott Hewler noted in his book No Man's Lands. When describing the encounter with Achilles, he says, Achilles, the most celebrated hero of all, whose love of honor and glory defined him, tells Odysseus that he made the wrong choice. Glory? For the birds. But your son, your family, that's worth your time. To express your understanding of how Odysseus is changing as a character, complete the third column of page 2 on your Book 11 handout. You must work independently on this task, but you may use any notes that you have. I will be checking your work on this handout to assess your understanding. You will have about 7 minutes to complete this part. If you do not complete your Book 11 handout, it is going to be for homework and will be due tomorrow before the start of class. You will need your copy of the Odyssey and your partially completed Book 11 handout. I'm going to go ahead and close out this session so that you'll have time to continue working. Congratulations! You have completed Lesson 22 of the Odyssey unit. In this lesson, you learned about the turning point in the Odyssey. You also analyzed how complex characters develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, and advance the plot or develop the theme.